Part 42. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 417. The dwarf old man's movement skills are absolutely magical. The previous finger directly made Subai and Sudong have the idea and instinct to retreat. Therefore, with his strength in all aspects, even if he defeats them one by one, they can defeat them one by one. For a ground kill, the success rate is estimated to be over 80%. But Horror Radio doesn't like to do that kind of sure kill game, which goes against his aesthetics. It's just like the Avenue. It likes to have 3 people surrounded and 1 missing, and it likes to play with the listeners in their own hands. After arranging extremely dangerous situations, they also leak out. There is a glimmer of life. As for whether you can catch it, this is not what horror broadcasts need to worry about. Of course, similar to Blood Corpse, one person massacred the entire audience in Shaanxi, which is something that horror broadcasters cannot tolerate, so once they learned the true identity of Blood Corpse, they pulled him into the world of the story. Carry out killing. But even if he committed such a heinous crime, in Subai's view, the terrorist broadcast did not kill the bloody corpse at once, but left him one last struggle. In the world of the story about the stolen blood corpse, the blood corpse told Subai that because he had mastered some power obtained from that place, the terrorist broadcast could not completely kill it. However, in Subai's view, it was more likely to be even if the horror broadcast reaches this point. Faced with the bloody zombie who angrily pulled out a piece of cabbage in his field, it still maintained its own aesthetics and deliberately left the bloody corpse the last chance of splendid death and instant youth, even if this opportunity was really it couldn't be smaller, but in the end, if Subai hadn't burst out his potential due to the influence of his own clone, plus a lot of luck, the blood corpse would have really had the chance to finally see Subai and follow him. The horror broadcast had just started again, and the ending of the bloody corpse seemed to Subai to be full of ridicule from the horror broadcast. And now, in this situation, the dwarf old man's unique murderous intention towards Nilan is the birth gate. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible for Subai and Sudong to harm a normally calm old dwarf. But now, the bloody stab wounds on the dwarf old man's chest and the 5 bloody holes on his shoulders pierced by Subai's broken nails all told of the trauma he had suffered. Hold him! Sudong shouted to Nilan. Nilan had no time to reply. At this time, she changed her previous fierce fighting style and began to use her body skills to dodge and move around. However, this may not be her best method, or maybe her body skills are actually not good at it. Yes, but the dwarf old man's movement skills are indeed too powerful. In the time that Subai and Sudong took a few breaths from the blow, Nilan had already left 7 or 8 scars on his body, even on his face. After a blood groove went down, and a little higher, Nian's left eye was probably useless. Damn it, some blood needs to be drawn. Sudong looked at Subai. Subai nodded. He knew what Sudong meant. If he wanted to get rid of this dwarf completely, he, Sudong and Nilan would all have to pay a heavy price, and the firepower and the thoughts of the 3 would often determine the 3 man's final success or failure. Sudong stood up, waved to Nilan, then clenched the hilt of the knife with both hands, and his breath sank in his dantian. A wave of air swept over him from the surroundings, blowing his hair completely away. Even though he was naked at the moment, it was still difficult to cover up the master's demeanor in him. Generally speaking, those who choose enhanced swords or ancient martial arts, or even enhanced people such as Taoist monks, in reality, they are more or less the same as what they choose. The reinforcement is somewhat related. For example, Fatty once said that the last 3 generations of his family were Taoist priests. His grandfather was a Taoist priest who worked in the countryside. His father went a step further and specialized in fortune-telling and feng shui for wealthy officials in the city. When it was Fatty's turn, he decisively chose the Taoist enhancement for the first time after entering the horror broadcast. Although he didn't know how true or false the fatty's family education was, he had been exposed to it since childhood, and it was indeed easier to accept it, and Su Dong should be a martial arts practitioner in the real world, so people like this, with the accumulation and insights in the real world, can often get twice the result with half the effort after choosing the corresponding strengthening path in the horror broadcast. Ni Lan naturally knew what Su Dong meant. At that moment, he was slapped on the back by the dwarf old man. His face turned pale again, but his figure passed directly by Su Dong. Correspondingly, the dwarf old man also passed by Su Dong without any scruples. This time, based on the experience last time, Su Dong did not confront the old dwarf as he did before, but deliberately missed the gap of a second. When the old dwarf was already behind him, Su Dong's dantian moved. A cyclone burst out from the middle, and the sword light immediately turned into countless shadows. He exerted force on his waist, rotated, and swung the sword. This powerful and heavy knife struck the old dwarf hard on the back and followed the old man's momentum, trying his best to save Su Dong himself, but the damage would only be more. Boom! The dwarf old man seemed to have had several bones smashed into pieces behind him, making a harsh sound of bone breaking. His whole body was knocked out of the way, and he stumbled straight forward, crashing into an abandoned building in front of him. That area of the wall was directly shattered. Damn, it feels so good. Su Dong laughed loudly, collected his energy, started to move, and started to prepare the next move again. To be honest, at other times, he would not have had the opportunity to attack such a strong opponent so completely without reservation. This feeling. Happy. Ni Lan supported the ground with one hand and gasped for breath. Her injuries were the most serious and her eyes were slightly cloudy. She was under the greatest pressure and had the greatest responsibility. This was something she had no choice about. Who said that? The resentment of more than 1,000 people was concentrated on herself. The dwarf old man walked out of the ruins again. His hair was disheveled and his back seemed to be hunched down due to the heavy blow. He looked very embarrassed, but his eyes were still red and he was still staring at them. Ni Lan. The next moment, the dwarf old man rushed towards Ni Lan again like a mad dog. Yes, there was really no one else in his eyes, even if those two people kept hitting him hard. Ni Lan passed by Subai this time. When the dwarf old man passed by him, Subai, like Su Dong, did not deliberately attack in the opposite direction of the dwarf old man. Instead, when he passed by, his body shaped with a twist, his left hand strangled the old dwarf's neck. This was a grappling movement. However, although the old dwarf suffered continuous heavy injuries, his body's brute force was still extremely strong. Subai was almost carried by him and ran. Of course, it was also because Subai didn't play tug of war with him like last time. Immediately afterwards, Subai's right hand also circled around and came to the front of the dwarf old man. The Hellfire shotgun appeared directly in his hand, and the muzzle of the gun was pointed at the dwarf old man's mouth. The old dwarf was roaring like a wild beast, so Subai easily saw the opportunity and stuffed the muzzle of the gun into the old dwarf's mouth. Boom! 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 Continuous shooting, non-stop shooting. Subai felt like a matador at this time. Ni Lan was the red cloak, and the mad bull was the dwarf old man. Subai didn't know how many times he had pulled the trigger. Now the Hellfire shotgun was actually consuming Subai's own energy. Subai could only feel that the dwarf old man was running slower and slower, and he was also. As I became weaker and weaker, a feeling of fatigue began to come over me. Finally, when the dwarf old man stopped, Subai slipped off him and fell to the ground. He was panting heavily and his chest was heaving. Subai was really tired. The dwarf old man stopped where he was. Half of his face had disappeared, leaving only half of his face standing on his neck. No facial features were visible, only the red blood vessels and the white brain matter. These things did not spill down, but continued to function. Looks very scary. At this time, Nilan bit the tip of his tongue and once again stimulated his potential. He opened his bow and arrow, and the blood from the tip of his tongue spurted out and sprinkled on the arrow. The person also seemed to have had all his strength drained away, his body went limp and he collapsed on the ground. This arrow directly pierced the head of the old dwarf, and there was an arrow stuck upside down in the remaining half of his face. The arrow was emitting a terrifying temperature like a soldering iron, and the old dwarf also had there was a constant smell of barbecue. At this time, Sudong walked slowly in front of the dwarf old man, turned around, picked up his big knife and slashed horizontally. Puff! Half of the dwarf old man's head finally separated from his body. The headless body stood in place for about 10 seconds, then slumped to his knees, and his vitality completely disappeared. This vitality was really countless times more terrifying than Xiaoqiang. Sudong's face flushed, he covered his chest, leaned his sword on the ground, and knelt down, his body shaking. Even if the other party has such obvious shortcomings. Even if the other party is like an upright and irrational mad dog. But in order to kill him, 3 people. It also consumed almost all of his energy. None of them died. In the glass window, someone said with a worried look. Fear was already showing in his pupils. This look appeared in the eyes of most people. What are you afraid of? They have already run out of gas. If there is another terrorist broadcast like last time, I would be happy to do so. You must know that the power that terrorist broadcasts give us and the magical weapons they give us are all fake. But the magic weapons on them are all good things. Moreover, our trial mission also said that whoever can kill them can get any kind of enhancement from them. This is us. An opportunity to reach the sky in one step. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 418. Subai just wanted to lie on the ground at this time, not wanting to do anything. He was too tired, really too tired. This was not like the previous fighting. The fight was very fierce and the injuries were serious, but it was not like that. It's so depressing because it's rare for everyone to fight so evenly that they use up every last bit of their strength from start to finish. But this time, the dwarf old man, who was like a mad dog, only had Nilan in his eyes, and regarded Subai and Sudong as if they were nothing. Therefore, Subai and Sudong fully devoted their energy to the dwarf old man. On the body, there is no need to defend, resist, or be distracted. You just need to use all your strength against the opponent who is like a sandbag in front of you. Therefore, both Subai and Sudong are really in a state of overdraft now. Different from Subai and Sudong, Nian's overdraft was not that serious at this time, but her injuries were very serious. The dwarf old man's offensive was all on her alone. Subai and Sudong except for their initial confrontation with each other. The old dwarf didn't know much about it, so except for the time when he blocked it hard, he suffered some injuries, but there were no injuries after that. However, the only similarity is that the 3 of them have reached the end of their rope at this time. It is really not an exaggeration at all. Sudong still had his eyes open. He was kneeling on the ground with a knife on one knee. He still raised his head slightly and looked at the glass window on the top floor of the tall building. Although it was far away, Sudong still had a feeling that behind the mirror the figure is also looking at him. Tell me, what are the people behind the glass windows thinking? Sudong said this to Subai. Subai closed his eyes and shook his head. When he received no response, Sudong continued, then, how many of us 3 sinners will survive in the end? It's already good to be able to survive. Subai slowly opened his eyes at this time. He didn't look at the roof of the building, but at Sudong. Just now, Nilan was severely injured and he pulled the trigger continuously. He exhausted all his energy, but Sudong seemed to still have some energy left. This man who entered the world of the story naked, This man who liked to talk and urinate, was definitely not as pure as he showed. Maybe it's because I spent more time with the fat man and the monk. For example, the fat man pretended to be a pig and ate the tiger, the monk's compassion was sad, and Gyatso was upright and ruthless. These people are one thing in front of them and another thing behind them, and they can actually achieve a perfect harmony of true and false disguises. Subai felt this feeling in Sudong. It's not that Subai is belittling himself. Among the three, the one with the highest survival success rate is probably the one with the least clothes. Subai actually doesn't have much confidence in himself anymore. It's not because Subai is afraid of Sudong. It's not because Subai suddenly became depressed. In fact, no matter when, Subai never lacked the final hysterical courage and the courage to make a desperate move. But since entering this story world, I don't know why, every time he sets his sights on when opening a glass window, I always feel an ominous premonition. This hunch has no reason or basis. But a haze naturally formed, weighing on my heart. Ordinary people's sixth sense may be biased, but as the level of life increases, and as one seems to have begun to touch the edge of cause and effect, this hunch should not be groundless. Brother, I have something on my mind. Sudong seemed to be a bit of a talker, and he had no intention of saying anything to Ni Lan, so he just liked talking to Subai. Subai's eyes suddenly became sharp at this moment, staring at Sudong coldly. This is a warning, an obvious and clear warning. The rabbit bites people when he is anxious. If you continue to deliberately look for flaws in my soul and deliberately induce me to fall into that rhythm, I will die with you at the worst possible time. Even if I die, I will drag you with me to be buried with you. Sudong turned his face away, opened his mouth, and smiled. You are not a brother if you are too worried. Although he didn't admit it, Sudong felt horrified in his heart, and he felt like he was breaking out in a cold sweat. He relied on sword skills in close combat, and his kung fu in horizontal training was also amazing, but his real secret weapon was actually his in terms of mental strength. He can be regarded as an eccentric listener, but this kind of strengthening mode allows him to easily take advantage of many complex situations. At the beginning, he actually showed his ability in this area, that is, he tried to use his mental power to hypnotize his first opponent, but he was backlashed and had a nosebleed. This scene was naturally discovered by Subai at the time. Obviously, Sudong also discovered the restless side of him. At this time, he actually dared to dig a hole for himself, tempting himself to naturally amplify that depressed mood. Ni Lan, who was lying on the ground bleeding without stopping, suddenly laughed out loud. There were still blood stains between her teeth. This kind of laughter was full of mockery. They're all like this, they're all like this. We just killed a common opponent together, and the next second we immediately turn our guns and start plotting against our own people. Are you tired? Sudong smiled. He stood up with force, raised the tip of the knife horizontally, and pointed at Ni Lan. You stinky bitch actually started an anti-Japanese national united front. Damn it, you said I was sinister. Okay, everyone, please stand up. Don't be too late to react when the scene changes, Sudong reminded. Subai lay on the ground with his hands spread out. I'm completely exhausted. The injury is too severe, I can't move, Ni Lan also whispered. Haha. Sudong stood there holding the knife, his body weight resting on the knife. It's not a competition for Oscars, is it? Yes, his family knows their own affairs. Although Sudong, Subai, and Ni Lan are not as close as the same family, it is undeniable that the three of them are almost the same level of strong listeners. They judge others by themselves. The old dwarfs have been dead for almost 10 minutes. It should be true to say that they have not recovered much strength. It is also true to say that Ni Lan was seriously injured, but it is not possible to say that 10 minutes have passed for them. Stand up, that would be a bit too fake. No matter what Sudong said, Subai and Ni Lan still didn't get up and were lying on the ground. Su Dong seemed to suddenly think of something at this time. He immediately raised his head and glanced at the glass window again, and his face immediately tightened. Damn it, is it too late for me to pretend to be weak and fall down again? Ni Lan shook his head imperceptibly, other than letting the people above know that the three of us are all pretending, it has no effect at all. After all, they are just weak in strength, not low in IQ. Su Dong really can't do this kind of thing that harms others and does not benefit himself, because the three of them have not taken the step of completely breaking up, so there is no need to be so decisive. Damn it, it was because I discovered that Subai had a mental problem and just dug a hole for him that I actually made such a low-level mistake. It's time to choose someone, inside the glass window said. She was still holding the unfinished champagne in her hand. The champagne in other people's hands was put down. Almost no one drank it all, because it was so full. The atmosphere was completely gone after the three sinners below killed the old dwarf. The fact that Subai and the three of them are not dead means that the danger to the 9 of them has not been eliminated. At this time, how could they still be interested in drinking and celebrating? The champagne was opened at the beginning, and the celebration was celebrated at the beginning, but now it looks so funny. Of course, everyone can see clearly that the 3 people below are all injured and very weak. They know that they are very strong, but they also know that they are also mortal bodies and are not unstoppable. Their strength is also absolutely not endlessly. They are already much weaker than they were at the beginning, which means that the chances of them waiting for them are getting bigger and bigger. This is a killing game. For the 3 sinners, they are almost treated as indigenous NPCs in the story world by the horror broadcast to bring hardship and pressure to the real listeners. But at the same time, Subai and the other 3 will also lose their ability. Whoever successfully kills the boss who dropped the equipment will not only get their magic weapon, but also inherit one of their enhancements. Welcome to the Horror Radio Show. I am the host of the show. I don't have a name, because the name here has no meaning at all. The familiar voice of the horror radio host sounded through the glass window, and the 9 people in the venue immediately fell silent and stood there. Everyone will make mistakes, and there is nothing better than knowing their mistakes and being able to correct them, but since you have made a mistake, the first thing you have to do is pay the price. This is the law, this is public morality, and it is also an eternal constraint. They are prisoners in chains. They have now had their teeth pulled out and their wings beaten off them. I'm really weak now. Now, it is time for you to pick up your dignity as a judge. Or you can kill them. Or, you will be killed by them because of your negligence as judges. That's what the truth says, and that's what the words say. Now, I'm starting to draw lots. Are you ready? 9 people, both men and women, held their breath at this time. Although the host of the horror broadcast said it was a lottery, there was only one beam of light that kept moving back and forth on everyone. They did not draw a lottery. No one can tell whether it is randomness or a black box operation in the horror broadcast. Because no one has the ability to explain it clearly. Suddenly, the beam of light fell on a dressed woman. The woman was the only one among the crowd who still held the champagne in her hand. When the beam of light fell on her, she was a little stunned and seemed so caught off guard. All right. Now, please state your choice. The voice of the horror radio host came faintly. The woman's fingers suddenly began to tremble, and the liquid in the wine glass rippled. She was hesitating. She is hesitant. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 419. The horror broadcast was merciful and gave 3 exhausted men 15 minutes to rest. But horror broadcast is also ruthless because it only gives 15 minutes. It's like giving water to a thirsty person in the desert. but there are only a few drops of this water. The next moment, the environment around Subai, Sudong, and Lan changed again. A wall first appeared around the three people, and the wall continued to extend and expand. None of the three tried to destroy this wall. They were not new people and would not do such a whimsical thing. Lan had been lying on the ground. Before the opponent appeared, she did not make any moves and did not want to make any moves. The most important thing was to seize the time to recover and save all her energy. However, the feeling of the cold cement floor under his back slowly changed. When a white light flashed past, Lan found that he was lying on a leather sofa. The traces on the sofa gave her a vague sense of familiarity. With his left hand, he grabbed the edge of the sofa and sat up slowly. On the small glass coffee table, there were two cute cups. A cute cartoon girl was painted on one cup, and a cute cartoon girl was painted on the other cup. Cute cartoon boy. Looking at the two cups, Lan sat there in a daze. There were still injuries on his body, and even the wounds were still dripping with blood, but Lan seemed to feel nothing. His eyes were all blank. Stare at this coffee table. Time passes bit by bit. But at this time seemed to have no effect on Lan at all. Click. The door was opened from the outside, and a man in jeans walked in from the outside. When he saw Lan sitting on the sofa, his eyes were full of surprise. Lan smiled slightly at this time. This smile was beautiful. Even though she had experienced the baptism of blood and fire, she was still a woman after all. As long as she wanted to, she could still show her feminine side. Are you hungry? Lan stood up, swaying. The man pursed his lips, as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Let me make you omelette rice. Lan grabbed the wall and walked towards the kitchen step by step. The rooms here, the decorations here, every bit of it, are deeply imprinted in her mind. Even after opening the refrigerator, the row of fresh eggs always placed in the top row is still there. The man was sitting on the sofa, a little hesitant, a little afraid, a little panicked. His hands clenched and unclenched from time to time, as if there was a war between heaven and man in his mind. Peeling garlic, cutting onions, beating eggs, and heating oil into the pan. Lan did every step meticulously, and she did every detail very methodically. These were her favorite things to do before, and she also felt that the happiest thing. Any normal person, except for chefs, will always feel hard but sweet when cooking food for the people they care about. However, although the range hood removed the smell of oil smoke, Lan could still smell the bloody smell on her body. She did not take a bath, and she was too lazy to take a bath. She was making this omelette rice very carefully, although it was prepared for him. Although she wanted to give it to him, in fact, it was also made for herself. Unknowingly, Lan suddenly felt grateful to Terror Radio. When he chose her, Terror Radio gave her a chance to remember. This is probably Stockholm Syndrome. It has been clearly persecuting you. He is a human being, but in the process of persecuting you, he suddenly becomes a little gentler to you, and you immediately develop an infinite liking for him. The egg-stuffed rice was brought out by Lan. Her steps were still a little frivolous, but she was much better than before. For an audience of Ian's level, the level of life is much higher than that of ordinary people, and her resilience is naturally much stronger. A lot, even to a degree that ordinary people cannot imagine. The man kept staring at Lan, and the panic in his eyes became more and more intense. There was even murderous intent surging deep in his pupils. Lan seemed to know what he was thinking. She just put the chopsticks in place, then sat on the sofa, rested her head on the man's shoulder, and comforted. Don't worry, my injury is very serious. Even if you give me half a day, I won't be able to recover much. At most, I can only barely move. You have enough time to kill me, so there is no need to be in such a hurry. At least, you should take a bite of food before you do it. I won't run away, right? Nini, that's not what I meant. The man looked a little embarrassed and picked up his chopsticks while explaining, but he couldn't take off his chopsticks with the omelette rice in front of him. Lan found a more comfortable position for her head on his shoulder. This shoulder, which she had always missed, could now rest on her head for a while. However, Lan knew in her heart that this was just wishful thinking. I thought I would be different, but in fact I am still the same as those girls in the real world. Once she gives her feelings, if she trusts someone else, she will be greeted with heartbreaking pain. That heartbreaking feeling was still fresh in her memory. Why don't you eat? Lan urged when he saw his lack of movement. The man didn't know what to say. Lan smiled empathetically, and scratched the artery of his right arm with the nail of his left hand. The blood immediately flowed out, directly staining the sofa red, and began to drip onto the tiles on the floor, gradually condensing into a small patch. Look, if I'm like this, my recovery speed is far slower than my weakening speed. Now, you can rest assured. Eat quickly, you will kill me after you finish eating, right? Be good, I won't resist, I'll let you kill me, because I no longer have the strength to retaliate against you. I don't have the strength to go and kill you, even if I let the cruise ship you might stay on sink completely. Ian's voice became weaker and weaker, and her eyes slowly began to close. In this familiar room. In this place where I condense myself into the most helpless and sweetest place after entering the horror broadcast. Perhaps, dying here, dying in his hands, although it is ironic, is not a bad ending. Suddenly, Lan laughed at himself. He was still so stupid and naive from the beginning to now. However, Ian's so-called false happiness did not last long. A sharp object pierced directly into the back of his neck. When the opponent stabbed, he was very decisive and did not hesitate. It turns out that your email needle has become so powerful after being strengthened by the broadcast. I feel that my soul is burning and will soon turn into nothingness. Lan still leaned her head against the man. The man held a long needle in his other hand. The first half of the long needle had completely submerged into Ian's neck. It's you, lunatic. You forced me to despair. You forced me to almost die in the real world. You crazy woman. You crazy woman. The man's voice was full of anger and fear. It was obvious that he really didn't have much love left for the woman Lan, only full of resentment. Ian's face had already turned pale. He laughed dryly, as if he had encountered something very ironic. How about you? When I first entered the story world and met in the experiencer story world, how did you say that you liked me? You fell in love with me at first sight. You said that two people must depend on each other. You said that the whole world has abandoned me, but you will not abandon me. We live together in the real world. I give you the story points I exchanged for my life in the story world in exchange for magic weapons. I give you my clean body. I cook for you and wash your clothes. I prepare everything. I gave you a baby. Do you know how desperate and helpless I was when I first entered the horror broadcast? Why did you still deceive me and deceive my feelings at that time? 2 lines of tears fell from the corners of Ian's eyes. In the real world, male public relations are no longer new. Male public relations who are personable, elegant, and considerate can easily capture the hearts of many urban girls and even rich women. They are skilled in their tricks and have great control over women's hearts. Accurate, they know better how to treat women, or how to deceive women. Of course, the so-called male publicist is a name that sounds better than a duck. It just feels like it is more advanced than a duck, but it still relies on a group that sells their male appearance to gain profits. However, what Lan never expected was that there were people like this in the listener circle. They were looking for those female listeners. You can imagine the pressure on female listeners to survive in the horror broadcast. They seem to be strong. But in fact, warmth is more needed, and as long as their defenses are opened, they will dedicate everything to you and strive to give their all in the limited life of the audience. When Annie Lan found out that the man she loved so much was actually maintaining this kind of relationship with 4 or 5 other female listeners at the same time, Annie Lan almost went crazy. Perhaps it was due to her talent. Annie's strength improved rapidly in the story world, just to save her lover's face. She didn't show much in front of her lover, but when everything was a deception, she started angrily chase him down. When she learned that he had boarded a cruise ship to avoid her, Annie Lan lost her mind and sank the cruise ship. At that time, she didn't care at all about the lives of more than 1,000 ordinary people on the cruise ship, nor about the horror broadcast. Punishment, she only felt that she needed many people to bury her love with her. But now, she was actually really tired. This was even more tiring than the previous fight with the dwarf old man. He refused to even take a bite of the food he cooked. He actively chose to kill himself. Even if he had given up on his life, even if he was still stupid at this moment, even if he had made the stupid decision to die and let him live. He still can't wait, he still can't wait, he still doesn't trust himself. He uses his dirty heart to deceive others, but in his eyes, he is also dirty. Just die like this. Click /. At this time, behind the sofa, a figure suddenly appeared. The figure held a sharp dagger in his hand. He was afraid, he was scared, but his knife still fell heavily, and he tilted the head of the woman on the sofa who was crying. Cut it down. From beginning to end, in the eyes of the black shadow. On the sofa. No. In this room. There is only this one woman. The woman's head fell to the ground, and the black shadow slowly solidified, and a man's face appeared with a pockmark on his face. He looked at the bloody dagger in his hand and the head that fell to the ground in disbelief. Ha 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 ha, I actually succeeded, I killed her, I really killed her, ha 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 ha. An unbelievable smile appeared on the man's face. He didn't know why, that such a terrifying woman actually sat there motionless and let him kill her, as if she had given up all resistance, as if she had already completely plunged into despair. The man felt that what he had just killed was not a terrifying and powerful audience, but a corpse with a heart filled with despair and only one breath left. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 420. There are white walls all around. Su Dong is walking slowly with one hand on the wall. He is very familiar with everything here. At the corner in front, there is a door, which is the door of his home. The word home. For Su Dong, it was very simple, because his family structure was originally very simple, but later, it became even simpler. He had been ridiculous before, fooling around in society all day long and gambling. Later, his wife really couldn't live anymore and ran away with someone else. Su Dong was very open to this. If he thought about it from another angle, it was Su Dong. If I were a woman, I would rather run with others than live with myself. It is too miserable and too hopeless. However, he still has a son. The woman left, but the son stayed. Su Dong took his son to live with him. He said that he worked hard because of this incident. This is a bit false. It is really difficult to change Su Dong's previous living situation. Of course, it's just difficult, not impossible. After entering the horror broadcast, Su Dong finally seemed to be a different person. He was afraid of death, he was really afraid of death, but the fear of death accelerated his maturity and finally made him reborn. Walking into the door of the house, Su Dong saw a memorial tablet with no words on it, only a photo of a little boy. Seeing this tablet, Su Dong pursed his lips. He seemed to be a little afraid. Yes, afraid. This man who dared to stand naked in the story world, urinate and keep talking, at this time actually exposed his eyes. Cat expression. The memorial tablet is on the table in the middle of the living room, which looks lonely. On the table, there are some toys, comic books, and other things. This is fake. Sudong took a deep breath and pursed his lips. This is fake. Don't even think about disturbing my heart. This is indeed false. A voice came from the bathroom inside. This voice was very familiar to Sudong, very familiar. Looking away from his son's memorial tablet, Sudong turned to the bathroom. The door of the bathroom was slowly pushed open at this time. There was a mummy lying in the bathtub. Obviously, the voice did not come from the mummy. Where are you? Come out to me. Sudong growled. Haha, I really didn't expect that you would also be involved in the terrorist broadcast. Was it because I was involved that the terrorist broadcast also pulled you in? There was a hint of ferocity on Sudong's face, and he was like a hungry wolf that chose others to devour. Sudong knew the mummy in the bathtub. This mummy had raised him before he was alive. It was himself who killed him with his own hands, smashed his skull, dug out his brain and sucked out his brain matter. Is your home a mausoleum? The sound came again, this time not from the bathroom, but from the refrigerator in the living room. I don't know what you first strengthened, but it seems to be an assassin-like enhancement. So after the terror broadcast strengthened your strength, do you think you are capable of pretending to be a ghost in front of me? Sudong gritted his teeth and said. He quickly ran to the refrigerator, opened the door, and a human head rolled out. It was the head of a cute little boy. However, no matter how cute the boy was in life, if his head was cut off and kept in the refrigerator for so long after death, he would no longer be so cute, with blue skin, deep smoke rings, empty eyes, and tightly closed purple lips. Son, how could I let you fall? Sudong immediately squatted down, reached out and hugged the head, and then put it in the refrigerator. Because it was not placed in the freezer at the bottom of the refrigerator, the head was already a little smelly, and when the skin was touched, it felt like as if it was being rubbed off the bones. Sudong also felt a greasy feeling on his hands. Son, be good. Dad knows this is not true. After Dad returns, he will take you out for embalming. Don't worry, Dad will find a special Taoist audience to recreate your body. Dad can make your head return to the body and turn you into a little zombie. So, you can continue to be with Dad. Is this your confession and compensation? The voice suddenly appeared again. This time, it came from through the bedroom door. Sudong's eyes were already filled with thick bloodshot eyes. Obviously, he was under great mental pressure now. Sudong knew that this place was fake and was a scene deliberately designed by a horror broadcast, but it still stimulated his heart. It was a huge pain for him to recall all the memories that he didn't want to recall. I will kill you, really, Suchiang, I will kill you. Sudong gritted his teeth and said. At the same time, Sudong began to close his eyes. He did not continue to look for the sound in one place. He was forcing himself to use his own mental power to find it. What surprised Sudong was that his brother Suchiang also became an audience. Moreover, he actually chose himself and wanted to kill him. Did he want to kill himself in revenge? He. Kill yourself for revenge? My brother, you always looked down on me, thought I was worthless, thought I was idle, thought I was a disgrace to you. But. Very sorry. This is a horror broadcast. It's here. I've been around longer than you, and I'm actually more talented than you. You want to take this opportunity to kill me. Why are you still so naive? Sudong knew that his brother was using his physical skills to hide himself and confuse him, but Sudong believed that he could find him out and kill him. However, when Sudong's mental power was released, suddenly, the little boy's head placed there in the refrigerator suddenly opened his eyes, and bright red blood dripped from the little boy's eyes. Dad, Dad, it hurts, it hurts, Dad, Dad, it hurts, it hurts. The little boy's cry came faintly, directly into Su Dong's ears, and also affected Su Dong's mental exploration. Su Dong's sea of consciousness suddenly began to tremble, and Su Dong's whole body immediately began to shake. Damn it, son, don't make trouble, son, don't make trouble. Su Dong was roaring. Son, you have to be good. Don't make trouble with Dad. Son, you have to be obedient. You have to be good. At this moment, the mummy lying in the bathtub in the bathroom suddenly sat up. The mummy slowly turned its face and looked at Su Dong and his son. The mummy's mouth began to widen and open, and the cracked flesh began to collapse. His voice was very unclear, but it could still be heard that he was shouting. Son, 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 Dad is in so much pain, Dad is in so much pain. Dad, shut up, you old fool, shut up. The sound of the mummy completely caused Su Dong's released mental power to begin to distort. The shock in the sea of consciousness became more and more intense. Su Dong's 7 orifices were bleeding, and he knelt on the floor, looking extremely miserable. Dad, it hurts so much, Dad, it hurts so much. Son, I'm in so much pain, son, I'm in so much pain. The voice of Su Dong's son and the voice of Su Dong's father kept penetrating through his sea of consciousness like a magic sound. He wanted to take back his mental power, but he couldn't do it at all. You have obtained that skill. If you want to practice it, you need the blood of a close male. A man wearing work clothes appeared in the living room and stood in front of Su Dong. But at this time, Su Dong was suffering from the huge pain of his spirit being cut and torn. It was impossible to do anything. He could only not do anything. He kept banging his head on the floor. The man's workman's clothes still had clear oil stains on them. Your wife ran away, and you only have one son left. Just forget about it if you don't take care of him. You actually killed your son, dug out your son's head, and sucked your son's brains in order to practice that technique. Who paid you your previous gambling debts? Who helped you raise your son? He is our father. You actually drowned our dad and sucked him into a mummy in the bathtub. The man in overalls began to tremble in his voice. Then you started looking for me. Unfortunately, I was working in Africa with a construction company. You came to Africa specifically to look for me, but you didn't find me. The voice of the man in workman's attire gradually became deeper. I was supposed to die in that military conflict in that African country, just like my colleagues, but because of your appearance, I didn't die. So, I got infected with this, and I was pulled in by the terrorist broadcast. I also became a listener. A sickle appeared in the hand of the man in workman's clothing. He inserted the tip of the sickle into his mouth, and then stabbed it hard. The sound became very blurry, but it could still be heard. Come. Brother, if I don't kill you. Brother is really not here to kill you. Brother chooses you, come here. I'm here to fulfill you. Don't you want the blood of your closest male relatives? Don't you want the life of your dearest male? Come on, brother, I will give it to you, come on. The elder brother began to use a sickle to cut himself apart bit by bit, but the sound of shouting kept ringing. Ah! Su Dong lay on the ground in extreme pain. This kind of pain is really difficult to describe. A black figure appeared behind Su Dong. This was a woman. The woman was wearing black leather pants and a blue top, holding a shotgun in her hand. She looked in disbelief at Su Dong, who fell to the ground, hugging his face and twisting his body. She was a little panicked. Somewhat unbelievable. But she still slowly pointed the gun at Su Dong's head. Her fingers were trembling. Her heart was trembling too. The image of how this man killed an audience member whose strength had been enhanced has become her nightmare. Ah, the woman screamed. Boom. The gun went off. Sudong's head exploded. The headless body was also on the ground, motionless, and the body relaxed, as if freed. I killed him. Did I really kill him? I actually killed him. I did it. I did it. The woman looked at her hands in disbelief, as if she couldn't believe it at all. Surprise. It came too suddenly. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 421. The walls kept extending and expanding, and Subai finally got up from the ground, because the ground had changed from cement to tiles, and there was still water, making it look wet and uncomfortable. There was a pungent smell of disinfectant in the air, and the sound of footsteps of people coming and going could be heard from time to time. Subai's ears were buzzing, as if he had just been shocked while standing at the blasting site. Same. My mind also felt dizzy, and I felt a nauseous feeling from time to time. Subai knew that this feeling should not be brought to him by the changes in the horror broadcast environment. His physical fitness was here, and he would not be sick and dizzy due to the change in perspective and the blur and tremor of the picture in front of him. But what exactly does this feeling mean? Subai stood up and supported the wall with one hand. There was a person in white clothes walking in front of her. It wasn't until she got very close that Subai really saw her clearly. She was a nurse in white clothes. Nurse. Here. Is it a hospital? Subai pursed his chapped lips. He didn't know why, but now he felt very bad, uncomfortable, and painful. This kind of pain was not intense, but it could make Subai very tortured. Everything here is so strange. Subai can't remember that he has been to this place. In fact, Subai has rarely been sick since he was a child. That is, after he went to school alone in the coastal areas of Jiangsu and Zhejiang, he participated in some extreme. Occasionally I was injured during activities or while learning Taekwondo and was admitted to the hospital. I never went to the hospital once since I was a child because I never seemed to get sick at all. Moreover, this hospital must be quite old. It feels a bit like the hospital from 20 years ago, without the atmosphere of a modern hospital. Subai didn't know what the purpose of setting up this environment for the horror broadcast was, and he didn't know why he was so uncomfortable. He was obviously not seriously injured. Even if he was just a little weak, it was still within his tolerance. It's really more than that. Holding his chest with his left hand and supporting the wall with his right hand, he continued to walk along the hospital corridor. Every step he took was difficult, and with every step he took, the uncomfortable feeling became more intense. Perhaps. This is also a reminder, right? Because I am getting closer and closer to the place that makes me uncomfortable. Subai didn't know how long he had been walking. When he couldn't even sit up with support, a ward door appeared in front of him. This ward was facing the corridor. It was at the corner. The other ward doors were all around. Both sides. Is it here? Are you here? Subai had collapsed. Now, he actually had to crawl forward. This was an embarrassing way. Considering young Master Su's character, asking him to kneel down and walk was already an insult. However, there was no resentment or hesitation in Subai's heart, because he was now eager to think about what was in the ward in front of him. Of him. There must be something inside that makes me feel so uncomfortable. The sweat was flowing uncontrollably. Subai felt that the strength in his body was constantly being drained away, but the struggle in his heart became more and more intense. Damn. Here. What exactly is it? Subai stretched out one hand with difficulty and pushed towards the door of the ward. Fortunately, the ward door was not locked from the inside. It was just a false response. Subai's hand just pushed it gently, and the ward door was pushed open. Inside, there were 3 hospital beds. There were no people on the beds on the east and west sides. There was a woman lying on the bed in the middle. From Subai's point of view, You could see the long black hair spread out on the pillow. This was a woman. Who is this woman? Why does she make herself feel so uncomfortable? Subai thought of that possibility. This is my mother? In an instant, in the deep-sea cave of Kinhuangdao, the scene of the blue shadow being pierced by a crossbow arrow suddenly appeared in Subai's mind. It was precisely because of witnessing that scene that Subai merged with the hellfire powder in anger. Shotgun, regardless of the consequences, killed Junior and Taiza. It was precisely because of that incident that he was sent to the story world with the purpose of punishment. This. Is she really her mother? So, my mother was sick, so I was brought here by my father to see my mother? Because I was too young at that time, so I don't remember this memory at all? If the woman on the bed was not his mother, how could he explain his inexplicable uncomfortable feeling? Subai struggled to crawl forward, but as he got closer to the hospital bed, Subai's strength became weaker and weaker. When Subai finally crawled under the hospital bed, his whole body was completely wet with cold sweat and he was panting heavily. He was angry, but he couldn't raise the strength at all. The sound of the woman's breathing on the bed came leisurely. When he heard her breathing, Subai's heart became much quieter, as if he had regained a strange and familiar feeling. Subai just leaned like this. He wanted to stand up countless times and really look at this woman, but he really couldn't squeeze out any strength. This feeling of powerlessness and the feeling of expectation so close at hand kept coming. Subai was tortured. Ah, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Suddenly, the woman on the bed started to cry out in pain. The sound was urgent and sudden. Subai also shuddered. Hearing the woman's cry of pain, Subai's mood suddenly became confused. The woman reached out and pressed a button next to her. Soon, the door to the ward was pushed open, and a female nurse walked in. She thought nothing was going on, but after entering, she made a sound of surprise. Yeah, it's time to give birth. The female nurse immediately ran out of the ward and called the doctor. What? Giving birth? Subai, who was lying under the hospital bed, was a little confused. My mother is giving birth? Do you think you have a younger brother? Subai frowned. He tried to stand up again, but failed. He really had no strength for some reason. He was really powerless. Subai was extremely angry. This feeling of powerlessness made him feel powerless. He was extremely uncomfortable. A doctor and 2 other nurses hurried over. I told her that her due date was here, but her family members didn't listen. She must have a natural delivery. She must have a natural delivery. It's so superstitious, the male doctor started to complain after entering the door. This is the family's choice. We have no way to interfere. Let's prepare now, a nurse next to him said, prepare the operating room. The male doctor took a deep breath, suppressed his anger towards the superstitious family members, and said immediately, at the same time, we must prepare for a cesarean section. If the natural birth does not go smoothly, we will decisively perform a cesarean section. We are doctors and cannot allow those family members to do whatever they want. Where are the nurses? Where is the nurse? Soon, a nurse came in pushing a stretcher trolley. 2 nurses immediately lifted the quilt, helped the woman down first, and then let her lie down on the stretcher trolley. They would be pushed to the operating room later. Because Subai was lying under the hospital bed, he only saw the woman's back. This back looked very ordinary, and there was no sense of familiarity at all. Wrong. What exactly is going on? Subai was already a little confused. Who is this woman who is pregnant and about to give birth? Is she his mother? So, the child in her belly is myself? Damn it, was this a deliberate horror broadcast? Did it deliberately let me see the scene when I was about to be born? The woman was already lying on the stretcher, ready to be pushed out for surgery. However, at this moment, a gust of wind suddenly blew, carrying the fragrance of lavender. The male doctors, nurses and caregivers all passed out and lay on the ground. There was a strange silence in the ward. Even the woman with the big belly seemed to have fainted. Is definitely an extremely dangerous thing, because her amniotic water has broken, and she must survive at this time, and there is no room for any surprises. Sudbai subconsciously clenched his fist. The child in his belly. It's myself. Yes. It's me. Because Sudbai sensed it, when everyone else in the ward passed out, and when his mother also passed out, he could clearly feel a weak heartbeat. Because there was no interruption from others, this heartbeat was originally mixed with the very weak heartbeat was finally clearly captured by Sudbai. The heartbeat of the child in her belly was in the same rhythm as her own, and even resonated with her. A smile appeared at the corner of Sudbai's mouth. This is myself. That child is really himself. Own. About to be born. But what happened to this accident? Is the enemy coming to visit? But he was still born, and his mother also survived. So, his father should have arrived in time. After all, his mother and his wife were going to give birth to a child. Sudbai felt that his father should be nearby. He should be able to notice it soon and rush over immediately. Yes, it must be so, and it must be so. Soon, the ward door was slowly pushed open from the outside. The first thing Sudbai saw was a pair of exquisite black leather boots. In this era, women wearing such leather boots were still a minority among the minority, which meant that this woman's aesthetics and taste were much ahead of their time. Then, Sudbai raised his head with difficulty, his slender figure, beautiful figure. Soon, Sudbai saw this woman's face. Boom! A loud noise exploded in Sudbai's mind. This woman who walked in. It's the mother in my memory. What the hell is going on? Why was I as a baby in the belly of a woman who was not my mother? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 422. Why? 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 Sudbai was almost in a daze. He remembered his mother's appearance and his father's appearance. Although they died in a so-called car accident after he was 7 years old, the 7-year-old himself at that time had already I can remember a lot of things clearly. This woman who just came in is definitely his mother, her mother. But how could all this become like this? Why was he in the belly of a strange woman? At this time, a man walked in from outside. His appearance also shocked Sudbai. This was his father. This was his father. The two of them had already entered the ward and were standing next to the stretcher carrying the unconscious pregnant woman. What are they going to do? At this time, Sudbai's father's eyes suddenly moved away from the pregnant woman on the hospital bed. He seemed to be looking for something, and he seemed to have noticed something. Sudbai's mother looked at Sudbai's father. What's wrong? Stop talking, let me be quiet. Sudbai's father's eyes began to wander around. Suspicious. In terms of spiritual consciousness, you are far behind me. Besides fighting and killing, what else can you do? Sudbai's father's voice became more and more serious. Finally, he looked under the hospital bed. Look. He and Sudbai actually looked at each other directly. Suddenly, a cold feeling came over me. Sudbai suddenly felt a chill in his chest. He would have turned a blind eye to this feeling because he was obsessed with this scene. However, the chill in Sudbai's body became more and more rapid. This feeling is like a basin of ice water pouring down from the top of one's head in the summer, and the whole person can't help but shudder. He saw myself. He actually saw himself. This. How can it be? A huge fear suddenly came over me. I don't know why, but in my memory, my father, who had always loved each other and was very kind to me, actually gave me a huge panic at this time. This feeling of fear, like a tide, kept coming, constantly bringing terrible pressure to myself, and even made me feel like I couldn't breathe. A black shadow appeared behind Subai. When he saw Subai still lying on the ground, his eyes were full of disbelief. What is he doing? He can't see himself? Didn't he know he was coming? The man's face showed an expression of excitement and distortion. He held a silver spear in his hand. The spear was very sharp and exuded a cold light. A weapon that could be attached to a terrorist broadcast was naturally not an ordinary weapon. But even so, the man was still nervous. He was so nervous that he had to use both hands to hold the spear tightly. But the listener must be a listener. Even if the psychological quality is not as good as that of a real veteran, the listener himself has the ruthlessness tempered by the horror broadcast. Lee finally made him overcome all the uneasiness in his heart. He let out a low roar in his throat, sent the spear forward, and pierced Subai's chest directly. Puff. However, because of Subai's abnormal physical fitness, although the extremely sharp spear did not penetrate Subai's body, it was stuck by Subai's ribs. The man took a deep breath and prepared to exert force for the second time. However, when he poured the power into it, he was shocked to find that Subai's originally dull and emotionless eyes slowly regained focus, and at the same time, he was staring at him with a mocking look. For a moment, the man was drained of all his courage. How? How so? The man couldn't figure out why or what the reason was. Previously, during the first duel, the man and the other judges could clearly see how the three audience members were tortured and killed by Subai, Ni Lan and Su Dong in a relaxed and freehand way. Oppression, such an understatement, this situation where even though they were enhanced by the terror broadcast and equipped with high-grade magic weapons, they were still killed like chickens and dogs, it almost shattered all their courage. The man's mind was at a loss at this moment. Subai suddenly grasped the spear that was pierced into his chest, exerted force and slightly deflected the spear, avoiding his heart, but directly piercing his body. The man was also holding a spear with both hands, and his whole body was pulled directly towards Subai. A hellfire shotgun appeared in Subai's other hand and he pulled the trigger without hesitation. Boom! The man's whole body trembled, and a large piece of his lower abdomen was almost punctured. It's really a stupid mistake to dare to be distracted at this time. Subai's voice seemed a little hoarse. He was actually immersed in the fear of his father's just glance, but if it weren't for the fear of that glance, Subai would never have woken up. Instead, he would continue to be immersed in the previous scene, unable to extricate himself, and would continue to get to the bottom of things. But just now, Subai just relied on his own instinct to deal with it. He didn't even think about it or make any considerations. Everything just happened naturally. This fighting instinct. This survival instinct. This instinct to be cruel to others and even more cruel to yourself. It has been integrated into Subai's blood and bones. Subai clasped the man's neck with both hands, and used force to force him to press against him. Two fangs appeared at the corners of Subai's mouth. However, just when Subai was about to pierce the fangs into the man's neck. When he was sucking blood from his position, the man he had just captured turned into a puddle of fly ash, and the spear that pierced his body also disappeared. However, the terrifying piercing wound still existed. Ah! Subai took a deep breath. His chest was hurting. If he hadn't woken up in time, his body might have been penetrated continuously and he would have been killed. However, Subai didn't have the slightest feeling of surviving the disaster. Compared with his own life, Subai wanted to know what happened next. He was not in his mother's belly, but in the belly of another strange woman. His parents, actually the woman, showed up in the ward on the day her water broke. There is really too much information here that can subvert Sudbai's knowledge. Even it was enough to completely overturn Sudbai's outlook on life for more than 20 years. Sudbai held his head in his hands. He was no longer crying, he was just laughing. Yes, he was laughing, but in the process of laughing, his eyes began to gradually become moist. Inside the glass window, there are 6 people left. One of them suddenly said, "Just now, 2 of the 3 of them died, right?" But the person who successfully killed someone did not come back. One judge failed, but 2 judges succeeded. Is it considered that they have completed the real task and returned to the real world? So, now there are only 6 judges left to deal with Sudbai, the only one who is not dead yet. It's not that simple, a male judge wearing a red suit suddenly said. Those 2 judges did kill the man and the woman, but the man and the woman did not die. You see, their bodies are still lying on the cement floor, and there are no unnecessary wounds on their bodies. However, we just clearly saw that scene, and that scene appeared on our glass mirror. They succeeded. They killed the woman named Nilan and the man named Sudong. Only Sudbai, as if he suddenly woke up and was not killed, the other 2 were clearly dead in the picture. The man in the red suit pursed his lips, as if he was too lazy to talk nonsense. He just cast his eyes on the man in police uniform next to him and nodded lightly to him, who also nodded lightly in response. The man in the small suit began to look at the others again. If his guess was correct, there was another person among the 4 remaining people between himself and him who should have the strength of a senior. This is a punishing story world, but horror broadcast takes an otherwise serious punishment and adds its own kind of bad taste. Sudong and Nilan were not dead at all. The weaknesses in their souls were cut off by the terrorist broadcast. This is the horror broadcast taking the initiative to help them achieve mental perfection and progress. However, broadcaster would not be so kind-hearted and do good deeds anonymously, because in this 12-person team of judges, there are 3 judges who have the same strength as himself and have the strength of senior judges. They were never chosen. Reason: the man in the red suit has already guessed it. This is where the bad fun of radio really lies. The listeners who had just successfully killed Nilan and Sudong should have completed their mission, but they could not really get the full reward, but they had been sent back to the real world by the broadcast. Nilan and Sudong will wake up soon, and they will find that they are not dead. At the same time, they will find that their inner mental flaws and fatal weaknesses have disappeared, been made up for, and disappeared. They will be surprised. They will be excited. They will be happy. They may even wonder if this is a horror broadcast in the name of punishment, but it actually appreciates them and helps their growth secretly. But they never expected that the reason why they did not die this time was not because of the radio's understanding, nor because of the radio's different eyes. But horror broadcasting has already arranged 3 real senior listeners here. When low-level newcomers leave glass and go into the story world outside, they will gain strength comparable to that of seniors. What if they, who are already seniors, leave glass? What kind of terrifying power will it be enhanced by the terrorist broadcast? After Nilan and Sudong rejoiced and secretly rejoiced. I was shocked to find out. In fact, when the ending is already determined, it will be one kind of the deepest despair. It's also a horror broadcast, and he's the best at it. The man in the red suit picked up the champagne again. He drank and watched. The veteran who is still hidden. Who on earth is it? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 423. The appearance of the wall itself implies a kind of estrangement and self-protection. Everyone has his own inner world. There is no perfect thing in this world, even a terrifying broadcast that is almost omniscient and omnipotent. In Su after Baiyi experienced several story worlds at the beginning, the horror broadcast was shut down for 3 months for so-called updates and maintenance. In fact, this was equivalent to a method of error correction. Characters like the black boss in the convenience store outside the forest and the demon in the painting on the Taoist mountain peak appear because they are aware of the existence and dominance of terrorist broadcasts, so they do not hesitate to give up on themselves in a way to fight. It seriously affected the principle of the supremacy of storytelling pursued by horror broadcasts, so after the suspension of repairs, Subai never encountered the kind of boss that could sense the existence of horror broadcasts in the subsequent story world. Moreover, from the bloody corpse incident, it can be clearly seen that horror broadcasts are actually flawed, or limited. When the wall appears and begins to extend, it is actually equivalent to a kind of guarding and stealing. The terrorist broadcast sets up the wall, but it is both a supervisor and a thief. Under the cover of the wall, whether it is Subai or Nilan or Sudong, the fears, flaws, etc. in their hearts are completely revealed. This is a kind of bug, a kind of condescending crushing, without the gentleness and inconspicuousness of the ordinary story world. Because you are sinners. Terrorist broadcasts naturally have another set of rules for treating sinners. Because of this, a strong and fierce woman like Nilan would have a decadent feeling of seeking death. Therefore, a scum like Sudong, who killed his son and his father, would actually panic and suffer in the midst of his brother's scolding. And Subai is a little bit special. The monk once said to Subai that it is difficult for people like you to capture shortcomings in your mentality. That kind of habitual illness is actually a self-protection mode. Although it pays a huge price and is easy to die, it can maximize the chance of death. Ensure that your heart does not accumulate so much depression that a gap appears. Before, the biggest gap in Subai's heart was actually about his parents. However, Subai also killed Junar and Taizi in Kinhuangdao. To say that this was an apology to his mother, let alone Subai's. An explanation for myself. Being your son is too tiring. I have handed over all the money you left for me. I will not hesitate to risk my own life to violate the rules of terrorist broadcasting to avenge you. Well, even if I haven't paid back, I don't care about your business. I'm no longer interested. It doesn't matter whether you are still suffering in some unknown dimension or whether you are living a happy and free life. It's none of my business. My son is unfilial. Don't take your parents seriously, just do whatever you want. Subai didn't want to be a Garwood. He had been thinking about splitting mountains to save his mother since he was a child. However, when a horror broadcast wants to really mess with you, there's really not much you can do. Are there no regrets in your heart? No more weaknesses? No problem. I can make it for you. This is the reason why the scene Subai saw before appeared. This memory does not exist in Subai's memory, because at that time, Subai was still in the woman's belly and was not born yet. He was nothing. How could someone who was born a spiritual child have the impression he had at that time? But Subai's parents were listeners. When the fat man answered the call from the female nurse and said the two words Yezi, the horror broadcast instantly knew the true identity of the blood corpse. This is enough to show that the horror broadcast has a negative impact on everyone. The monitoring of the audience has almost reached a point where mercury is pouring into everything. Sudong blinked. He seemed a little surprised when he woke up. He was still alive. Damn, did I die and go to heaven? Sudong deliberately teased. At the same time, his eyes subconsciously began to observe Subai and Nilan beside him. He urgently wanted to know what happened. Subai smiled slightly. Don't worry, people like you can only go to hell, not heaven. Obviously, Subai, who woke up from the wall picture in advance, like the judges in the glass, saw some inner scenes about Nilan and Sudong. It was difficult not to see them. After all, horror broadcasts use a kind of it similar to a big screen projection method. Sudong's face suddenly sank, and his anger was immediately aroused, but the next moment, the anger suddenly dissipated. Haha, I made you laugh. Sudong got up from the ground and picked up his knife, as if nothing happened. Subai was slightly startled. He noticed the change in Sudong's temperament. He could actually pick up and put down that matter. It would no longer become his nightmare. It was like a virgin's sexual intercourse. Once, the pain was excruciating, but after that, it gradually got better. Terrorist broadcasts use this method to infinitely amplify their inner flaws and then kill them, allowing them to face the part of their hearts that they least want to see in the most terrifying way. After all this is over, just get used to it. Sudong also discovered this, and his face immediately showed a hint of joy. At his level, the spiritual understanding and improvement are no less than the improvement of specific strength. The two are more like worldview and methodology. Is something that complements and cannot be separated. Ni Lan also slowly stood up. There was a feeling of relief and letting go on her face. Generally speaking, senior people have cultivated to a point where they live like human beings, with no expression of joy or anger. This is a very simple step, but they now show their emotions on their faces. It is not that they deliberately mislead the people around them, but the joy of surviving the disaster and the surprise of successfully making up for their own spiritual flaws are really difficult to restrain. Is it worth being so happy? Subai suddenly asked. It's like someone took a knife and chopped off your personality. Are you still the same person you were before? Sudong looked at Subai with some surprise. Finally, he seemed to have discovered something and said with a smile, it seems that there is something wrong with you. You are not able to make up for your spiritual defects like us. Subai shook his head. I don't like this way of making up for it. In fact, there was another sentence that Subai didn't say, there will be no pie in the sky, and this style of doing good things and doing good things is completely incompatible with horror broadcasts. In short, at present, for the two of us, there are only advantages and no disadvantages. Ni Lan looked around, and her eyes couldn't help but fall on the glass windows on the top of the tall building. There are only 6 figures left, Ni Lan said. Yes, 6 courses, Sudong said. Subai shook his head. He didn't know whether he had not completely escaped from the emotion in the scene just now, or whether it was the lingering shadow that lingered in his heart every time he saw the piece of glass. In short, Subai had a feeling. This time the story world. It seemed like a dead end. Any struggle, any resistance, will become a meaningless dead end in the end. The 3 of them are like monkeys dancing on a red-hot iron plate. They are extremely provocative, but in the end they are the ones who provide for others. For entertainment and watching a show. Subai hated this feeling, but in fact it became more and more obvious. I have to say that in this story world, horror broadcasting is too gentle to the 3 of them. When delivering food at the beginning, those 3 guys who had just been forcibly enhanced in strength and equipped with magic weapons, even if they didn't know how much they weighed, wouldn't the horror broadcaster know? The dwarf old man who appeared next was frighteningly powerful, but he was stubborn. In the end, he was killed by Subai and the 3 of them. There was a near miss. This was a real near miss, except for Ni Lan who was slightly injured. Subai and Sudong were just out of strength, and it was not considered a danger at all. From beginning to end, there was something wrong. Ni Lan and Sudong were both standing, and only Subai was still lying on the ground. The surrounding environment has not changed for a long time. This horror broadcast gave us quite a lot of rest time. Ni Lan seemed a little uncomfortable. Then something is brewing, Sudong said. Subai closed his eyes. Suddenly, as if he discovered something, Subai immediately got up from the ground. Oh, I'm finally willing to give up, Ni Lan said. Have you two recovered? Subai glanced at Sudong and Ni Lan. Are you still immersed in the love wave that the horror broadcast has for you? What's wrong? Sudong was not angry. Subai smiled. Haha, he took a few steps forward, then stopped. I'm just happy, the wind has stopped, don't you feel it? As he spoke, Subai stretched out his hand and knocked in front of him. Dong dong dong. A layer of invisible glass has completely enveloped the environment where the three of them are. Immediately afterwards, Subai reached out and rubbed it again, and at the same time stretched out his tongue to lick his lips. The tongues of the vampires are good at tasting blood, and their picky taste buds allow them to taste more other flavors. The oxygen content is decreasing, and various elements in the air, including spiritual energy in the abstract, are all decreasing. Subai turned around and looked at Nilan and Su Dong, whose expressions were gradually becoming serious. He sighed inwardly. It seemed that their previous surprise was so great that even the two senior listeners were a little forgetful. But this is also it is human nature, and Subai naturally knows what kind of surprise it is to repair spiritual defects, similar to the protagonist in martial arts novels who are taught skills by the grandfather in the cave. In another half hour, this place will become a dead place. Subai squatted down. In front of him was a piece of grass. Look, the grass is turning yellow. Soon. It's our turn. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 424. Nilan pulled out his bow and arrow and shot out an arrow. The arrow turned into 70 or 80 rays of astigmatism in an instant. The astigmatism kept refracting. Gradually, the sealed area was revealed. The length of this area is about 8 meters, the width is also about 8 meters, and the height is about 3 meters. It is a quite large space. However, the grass on the ground in this space has almost completely faded from green to yellow. It looks like, already lifeless. Moreover, the air is becoming thinner and thinner. This can be felt from everyone's breathing state. Not all the oxygen here is breathed by Subai and the others, but is extracted. This everything in the space is being continuously drained away. Subai put his hands on the invisible glass in front of him. At this time, he was not very nervous. It should be because he was mentally prepared. But after all, seeking to survive is also a belief and an instinct. No matter what happens, sometimes, Subai would not sit still and wait for death. This was not his style. This shouldn't be an unsolvable situation. Su Dong, like Subai, began to use his hands to feel the glass, and he had just tried to chop it with his own knife, but no traces were left. Coming down, it is enough to see how strong this barrier is. Nilan sat cross-legged and closed her eyes, as if she was adjusting herself. She was lowering her metabolism completely so that she could gradually adapt to the deteriorating environment and increase her theoretical survival time. At this time, there is really no need to worry about fighting for oxygen, because the three of them are very strong. Fighting in this narrow space will only worsen the already poor sealing environment to the extreme in an instant, and it is possible that before the winner could be decided, both men suffocated to death. Ian's method seems a bit negative, but it has to be said that it is very effective. After all, people like Subai can stay underwater for a long time. The oxygen carrying capacity of each cell in his body has also improved due to the improvement of his life level. Becoming more powerful, even if it really becomes a vacuum area, Subai can still persist for more than 10 minutes under anaerobic conditions, but the current situation is not only that, the vitality here is also constantly being sucked away. This is the key of the problem. Oxygen is not only the only factor that determines survival. How long is the theory time? Su Dong looked at Subai at this time. 6 minutes, Subai said. In 6 minutes, we will be finished together. As he said, Subai glanced at Nilan, who was sitting cross-legged. She may be able to support 1.5 minutes longer than us. Haha, she is planning to cancel the terror broadcast if one of us dies. Su Dong directly pointed out Nian's thoughts. Indeed, terrorist broadcasts rarely make a situation where all the people in a team die directly. If there is no way to break the situation now, then after 1 or 2 people in the team die, the situation is likely to change. If it were other opponents who created this situation, maybe Sudbai, Sudong, or Lan would not be so negative. But the person who created this situation was a terrorist broadcast, which itself explains a lot of problems. You can only go with it. Go ahead with what it means. Breathing began to become more and more difficult. Sudbai had discovered that his skin was losing its smoothness, becoming rough and wrinkled, and his vitality was also being drained away. Sudong gritted his teeth. He also felt the life force being constantly drained from his body. Life force is an intangible but real thing. Sudong stood motionless while holding his knife. Stand up. Lan has maintained that posture for a long time. Sudbai sat down, but he didn't follow Nian's example of crossing his legs to adjust his body. He didn't think that he could save his life just by being submissive, but now he really had no choice. Will he trap us here directly in this way? Sudbai said suddenly, as if he was asking himself or others. Lan didn't answer. Her heartbeat could hardly be heard now. She had turned herself into a living dead state, trying to make herself last longer in the absolutely harsh conditions as much as possible. Sudong shook his head. It shouldn't be right, it shouldn't be like this. If it wants us to die like this, wouldn't the previous judges all take off their pants and fart? What if it's really just taking off your pants and farting? Sudbai said. Perhaps, the remaining 6 shadows above are actually 6 experiencers, who are just here for sightseeing without actually entering into the story. Sudong frowned. He was thinking about what Sudbai said. To be honest, he felt that Sudbai was right. If those 6 shadows were not even the audience, but just the experiencers. So, this really could be the ending that horror broadcast wants to do. He helped Lan and I make up for our lack of mood before, just to make us happy and give him a meal before his death. Then, let's stop this train of thought and change it to another one. Sudbai looked at the 6 figures behind the glass mirror on the tall building again. Just use a cage to trap us to death, starve to death, and thirst to death. Forcing us to die does not seem to be the style of broadcasting. If the 6 people behind the glass mirror are not soybeans and need to show their faces, what will happen if you think about it this way? Sudbai lowered his head silently. He was actually not asking Sudong and Lan, who had completely blocked the 6 senses, but he was asking himself. To play with horror broadcasts, you have to be familiar with the style of the broadcast. For example, if the broadcast suddenly makes you don't have to worry too much about dying of thirst in the desert if you are required to do any tasks in the desert, because letting you die of thirst in the desert inexplicably is not in line with the principle of storytelling being paramount in broadcasting. It's very likely that when you can't walk and are too thirsty, your feet will suddenly turn into quicksand. After trapping you, you will find that you have entered a dark cave. The plot will continue to advance. You may die at the hands of monsters and strange creatures in the dark cave. This is very possible, but once you enter the story world, the possibility of being dried and mummified in the desert is unlikely. If the 6 people behind the glass mirror need to appear again, then it stands to reason that we will not die in this container. Sudong punched the invisible barrier in front of him and made a muffled sound. This sound even alarmed Lan and brought her back from her previous state of suspended animation, because Lan was worried that Sudong would really die in the end. I can't hold on anymore. I won't let you live 1 minute and a half longer than me. I won't let you see the possible turning point after my death. At worst, I will vent my energy and violently shake the inside of this container. Accelerate the evaporation of the substances inside. If you are going to die, you will die together. To be honest, any normal person may have this thought when encountering this situation: I am going to die, why can you live? Sudong shrugged. You continue to be your mummy. I really have no interest in dragging people into trouble at this point. Lan continued to close her eyes. She and Sudbai and Sudong chose completely opposite attitudes to deal with it. Subai and Sudong were obviously still looking for a way to break the situation, while she was waiting for the opportunity to break the situation. If the next wave of judges still needs to appear, we will not die. Subai stopped talking to himself, but subconsciously began to think in his own heart. We will not die, but now our life force is being continuously drained away. If this continues, after only 3 minutes, this body will be considered useless. Suddenly, Subai seemed to have caught something. He thought of a possibility, and this possibility was probably correct. The whole person continued to maintain the original posture, and even his lips were still moving slightly. Subai was no different from before, but under the shadow of a big tree outside the container, a deeper black shadow slowly appeared. This was Subai. Bai was conducting an experiment, and it was the vampire phantom that he could summon that was tied to the cross. Yes. The terror broadcast is to take the initiative to destroy our physical body, so that we can face the next wave of 3 judges with only the soul body left behind. It is to reduce the difficulty of the next round of judges. No longer delivering food directly like the first round. This container can isolate any other form of energy, but it will not isolate the soul. When the vitality was drained out, the bodies of the 3 people died directly, and only the souls of the 3 people were left alone in the entire container. After that, the container was opened again, and the 3 new judges appeared at that time. It's just the intention of broadcasting. It is weakening the strength of the 3 sinners step by step, and creating advantages and opportunities for those judges who seem to be unworthy of the stage. There is no sign. Subai's body burned directly at this moment. He was actively burning, similar to self-destruction. Lan suddenly opened her eyes again and looked at Subai with a hint of anger. She took it for granted that Subai was planning to die together. Sudong also looked at Subai with a look of astonishment, while holding the long knife in his hand tightly. Burn your own body, incinerate your body, and try your best to transfer all the power of your body to your soul to stimulate the growth of your soul. Subai's soul floated out of his body at this moment, then passed through the barrier without any hindrance and appeared outside. Soul. Damn it, it's the soul. Lan and Sudong understood immediately, and they also began to burn their bodies without hesitation. Obviously, they also wanted their souls to obtain more nutrients from the body when they left the body. They also want to use the same method as Subai. Only. Subai's body exploded at this moment. The bodies of Lan and Sudong, who had not yet completely burned, exploded together. The souls of Lan and Sudong flew out of the barrier in panic. The 2 of them looked at Subai, the soul body on the other side who was obviously more solid and thicker than themselves, with resentment. They know. Subai deliberately made their souls weaker than his. Yes, it is very likely that all 3 sinners will die in this story world. If there is a glimmer of hope, at most one will survive. Sometimes, 3 people are allies. But the 3 of them all know that they are actually competitors and targets of competition. It is that illusory and only one who leaves the story world in a way of survival. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 425. Dead Taoist friends are not dead poor Taoists, which is the most basic foundation in the rules of survival of the audience. Even Subai and Fatty Monk actually have such a relationship, but now as several people know each other better and better it becomes more and more profound, and everyone can't help but look further in the direction. The current friendship is for greater compensation and benefits in the future, so it can reflect a kind of friendship, but in fact it is just maximizing benefits. For example, Fatty and Subai had this plan during their previous trip to Kinhuangdao. Obviously, Subai, Lan and Sudong don't have much friendship. When they can be cheated, they will cheat easily. Don't be polite to anyone. Ni Lan and Su Dong would do the same thing. Do it without hesitation. Because of this, Su Dong and Ni Lan just looked at Subai with eyes of hatred. The three of them were now in a state of souls, and could only vaguely maintain a human shape without eyeballs. Among the three, Subai's soul body is the most solid, and there is even a layer of light blue fire around him. This is because Subai has fully burned the power poured into his soul from his body before, and cannot he kept it for too long, but Subai didn't intend to keep it for too long. Since he couldn't bring out his physical body anyway, he simply reused it. Now he just can pass each level, and he can endure it one more time. They are all listeners who have reached this level. It is difficult for them to have the emotion of passively waiting for death. Unless they are forced to open their hearts by the horror broadcast just now, there is no way. The three people, no, to be precise, three souls, were suddenly separated from each other. It seemed that the horror broadcast still wanted to arrange a one-on-one mode. The distance between the three souls is more than a kilometer apart, and only a vague shadow can be seen between each other. At the same time, the three gates appear in front of everyone, still exactly the same as in the first round. Everyone's opponent, they all came out of it. But last time, all three of them were in peak condition. Although Subai had a fight with Ni Lan, it could only be regarded as a warm-up, and it was far from the point where both sides would suffer losses. Therefore, in the face of being forced by the terrifying broadcast, the three low-level listeners who had improved their strength and equipped themselves with magic weapons were really just like walking dogs, and easily eliminated these three guys who tried to pretend to be elephants by stuffing green onions into their noses. However, now, the three of them are all weak soul bodies. If they face each other again, they will really be in suspense. Maybe. Among the three, someone is probably left behind in this round. Squeeze it out bit by bit, play slowly bit by bit. Perhaps this is what horror broadcasters want to see most. The glass window closed in, and now there were only three people left. The man in the red suit slowly poured the champagne on the ground with a smile. Oh, he pretends to be so similar, I really didn't notice it at all. Introduce yourself, the man in uniform said, his eyes staring at the man with disheveled hair huddled in the corner. In the venue, the man in the red suit and the man in uniform actually noticed each other in the first round. Although both parties subconsciously hid themselves among a group of innocent low-level listeners around them, there were still some details. What can be discovered, or rather, this kind of detail, is just a senior listener looking for another senior listener. Because everyone knows that in this environment, it is definitely not a wise thing to expose one's identity as a senior listener to the dominant lower-level listeners around him. Any group will stick together. In a story world, senior listeners are definitely at an unattainable level for low-level listeners. When Lu Fuquan came to Subai, even with other thoughts and intentions, but that sound, sir, is definitely not a simple act, but a manifestation of the real status gap between the two parties. It is normal for the weak to stick together and isolate the strong, with clear distinctions. Therefore, these two people just want to see through each other without telling each other. They just know it in their own hearts. But now, there were only three people left in the glass mirror, so there was nothing to hide, and there was no need to hide it. The man in the red suit is named Chen Feng, and the man in uniform is named Lu Chen. Chen Feng's attire is a little exaggerated. His previous performance, whether he was talking or drinking, was all exaggerated, which made people laugh. I just feel that he is just a low-level listener who is easily stimulated, and a superficial guy who has difficulty controlling his emotions. Lu Chen, on the other hand, was wearing a police uniform. He rarely spoke or expressed opinions. He was slightly thin and standing there. Even if he was supported by a police uniform, he still couldn't hold up his temperament. Among the audience, they really don't care much about their identity in the real world. You are a policeman, but you are not a policeman. The impact is really not big. No matter how much people kill people and set fires, the police in the real world can't control it. Moreover, this policeman seems to be a bit disinterested. However, when there were only 3 people left in the glass mirror, Chen Feng's temperament suddenly changed. Even if he was wearing this bright red and beautiful little suit, he suddenly looked calm and restrained, and his brows were full of experience and stories. Lu Chen's back straightened up at this time, and the sense of majesty of the police was immediately established. Moreover, it was not only the aura brought by his identity as a police officer, but more importantly, the aura that he exuded as a person. The momentum he came out with, that kind of killing and decisiveness, that kind of ruthlessness and strength. After all, there are too many differences between senior people and low-level listeners. The gap between the two sides is just like that between generals and refugees, in all aspects. The remaining person was squatting in the corner. He had been squatting there and smoking. He really had a lot of cigarettes in his pocket, one after another, and there was a layer of cigarette butts in front of him. Pretending to be mysterious, Chen Feng walked up to the guy and squatted down. "Brother, I don't believe that in this story world, there can be a high-level audience, haha." Generally speaking, low-level listeners refer to those with a mission completion level of 4 or below, senior listeners refer to those who have fused their natal weapons or are close to merging their natal weapons, and high-level listeners refer specifically to Yan Hui Hong Lanlin's level. Exists. The man's hair was messy and his eyes were a little distracted. Even though Chen Feng was squatting in front of him, he still pretended not to see him and continued to smoke his cigarettes one after another. This story world is the reward we deserve. Lu Chen looked very calm. Horror radio will reward listeners who work hard for them. When the favorability reaches a certain level, the sweet date will decrease. Lu Chen and Chen Feng are both very active listeners in the real world. They never give up any opportunity to help Terror Broadcast complete real-life tasks and actively resolve events that may affect the balance of the real world. This time, as the 3 senior sinners were 3 rotten cabbages to the horror broadcasters, but it was similar to what happened with the bloody corpses. The horror broadcasters were not willing to just cremate these 3 rotten cabbages. If you throw it away or throw it casually into the garbage dump, waste still has value that can be used. For the judges, their main mission is actually very obvious, which is to kill these 3 sinners, and then get one of their enhancements. If a senior can get the strongest enhancement from another senior, then for the improvement of one's own strength is definitely not just a little bit, but a qualitative leap. The man with disheveled hair was still smoking. Seeing Lu Chen and Chen Feng still standing in front of him, he frowned slightly and asked, "Is something wrong?" "No, I'm just worried that if you continue to smoke, this building will be lit by you." Chen Feng and Lu Chen looked at each other. Both of them felt that they had met a senior audience member with a weird personality. This kind of person is very common. It's rare, but not unseen. Some people are getting stronger and stronger, and their personalities are becoming more and more withdrawn, but they just can't die. "Don't worry, I'm in charge of putting out fires." The man with disheveled hair chuckled, lit another cigarette, and continued to smoke happily. When he raised his head to speak, people could see his face clearly. Under the surface covered with grease, he looked like a man who was about 40 or 50 years old. There are middle-aged men on the left and right. Although there is no shortage of older listeners in the audience, it is indeed rare for older listeners to reach the level of seniors. A woman walked out of the door in front of Subai. A woman that made Subai a little unexpected. The woman was wearing a purple-blue armor and holding a red whip in her hand. She looked really heroic. "People. I really didn't expect that it would be you," Subai said sadly. "I didn't expect to meet you here. In fact, I really hoped that you would die in the previous round. I was really afraid of meeting you." The equipment and weapons on the woman are very dazzling, like a comic exhibition. This is because her previous level was too low. When horror broadcasts improve their strength, they are improved based on the original development model of low-level listeners. In fact, it is also because the low-level listeners' own strength and equipment are too low. Their strength is not strong, the reinforcement is not deep enough, and the magic weapons are relatively low level. The consequence of forcibly improving them is that they look red and green, which is very festive, but instead lost the feeling of high-level magic weapon. Fake, after all, it is fake. Come on, I'm in a soul body now anyway. That whip of yours is also aimed at the soul. It can restrain me just right. Come on. As Subai said this, he took the initiative to get closer. This seems to be saying, come. Whip me quickly. I'm looking for some smoke. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 426. You probably didn't recognize me at that time, Subai said as he walked towards the woman. The woman waved the whip in her hand, and a ravine was immediately created on the ground. This was a manifestation of the tyrannical power contained in the whip leaking out. Perhaps, the woman herself was a little frightened by the power of the whip. She was violent to herself. The increased strength should also be very unfamiliar. When Subai first went into the sea, he would rather swim with his body soaked in the sea water than play with the iron palm floating on the water, because Subai knew the importance of saving every ounce of his strength. Sometimes, life and death, victory or defeat, success or failure, are really just a competition of who can hold on longer with his last breath. The woman's behavior of waving the whip at will actually shows her inferiority, her lack of appreciation for power, and her ignorance of power. The soul body Subai continued to approach the woman. Although he no longer had the body that he was proud of, the pressure Subai put on the woman at this time was still obvious. This is the prestige accumulated by Subai, who killed the Rakshasa man like he was chopping melons and vegetables in the first round. This is the huge gap between senior listeners and low-level listeners. In short, when Subai pressed forward step by step, woman. Subconsciously, he started to retreat. The woman held the whip in front of her, and her expression looked very unnatural. On the one hand, her rationality was telling her that the man in front of her only had his soul left, and he could not beat her. On the other hand, her emotions were restrained. He couldn't help but be afraid of Subai. If I said that I recognized you at that time, would you believe it? The woman said while backing up. She was buying herself some buffering time. She was not stupid. In fact, no matter how low-level the audience was, there would be no fools. When selecting people for horror broadcasts, they would not be so low-level and let a fool enter their body. In the story world, what else is interesting to talk about? It's impossible, Subai said firmly. After I restrained my aura, you couldn't notice me at all. However, thinking about it now, if I had known that you were an experiencer, when I took your zitting shortbread, it shouldn't be so embarrassing. The woman stopped arguing. The female student who had enthusiastically shared the specialties she brought back from her hometown to her classmates in the hotel lobby clearly knew at this moment that she had no choice but to retreat. Between himself and him, there must be a difference between life and death, otherwise this game will not end. If he wins, then he will have the opportunity to reach the sky in one step, and no one will ever ridicule him for being an experiencer who doesn't even have the aura of power. The girl's eyes suddenly turned cold. Subai's soul also stopped moving forward in an instant. While the girl was constantly restraining her inner pressure and panic, Subai was actually constantly observing her. She was still weak, she was still very young, and there were many she didn't know how to hide a lot of information, and many small movements of her body could tell Subai useful information, all of which were betraying her, but she didn't even know it. This is a young baby, so tender that it seems as if it can squeeze out water. But now Subai is no longer a tiger, but a sick cat. For Subai, there are still opportunities, but he does not have much chance. There are so many choices, even if the two sides fight, they will never lose or retreat, because Subai really doesn't have the capital to take his time. The whip drew a beautiful arc and was whipped directly towards Subai. At the same time, a bottle appeared in the girl's hand. This bottle was not used to store elixirs. This bottle itself was a magical weapon with a stopper. After opening it, a black mist filled the air. This black mist was extremely corrosive to the soul. This woman, every magical weapon was aimed at the soul, which made Subai feel helpless. Boom! Subai's soul suddenly disappeared at this moment, and the woman's whip and black mist were all thrown away. She began to look around subconsciously. She was not good at using chi and consciousness to search and capture clues around her. The girl's panic did not make Subai think there was much chance. The blue armor on her body had amazing defensive power, and the whip and black mist, as long as she was captured, would have no effect on herself, who was left with only a soul body. For me, it's a nightmare. Therefore, Subai continued to wait patiently for the opportunity. Like an experienced old hunter, he looked at the rabbit in front of him, which was armed to the teeth. The girl's body kept spinning, looking back and forth, the whip kept flying around her, and the black mist condensed on the mouth of the bottle. She was obviously trembling in her heart, but in her actions, she still showed that she belonged to her own order. Subai, I really recognized you at that time and knew you were an audience member. Didn't I go back to the hotel alone later? Do you think that was a coincidence? The girl kept looking around for Subai while talking. Subai did not answer. He was not mentally retarded enough to communicate with the other party at this time and expose his position. Moreover, Subai also knew that if he did not speak or make any sound, the other party would not be able to discover his hidden position. On the contrary, he could put more psychological pressure on the other party. Before you came in, the fat man next to you was at the door, lighting a cigarette. He used his thumb to rub it. If you were an ordinary person, you might think it was magic, but I know it wasn't, because he lit the cigarette. His movements were so natural, and with his back to the street, he obviously wasn't trying to show off. The girl swallowed, and her expression became more and more tense. Subai, who was hiding somewhere, was like a hungry wolf that could pounce at any time. She was highly nervous, and even her breathing was a little fast. Can't breathe anymore. I guessed at that time that the fat man should be the audience. Then, the other person walking with the audience, that is, you, should also be the audience. Unfortunately, I am just an experiencer, and I don't even have a reinforcement. There are only a few low-level magic weapons on me that you probably don't even bother to take a look at. No, even the magic weapons are some junk that can't even be considered. The girl's tone gradually became heavier. She kept slowly rotating her body and observing her surroundings. It was obvious that the fighting space was restricted by a thin layer of glass, but she was still unable to find her enemy in a narrow space. None. The idea of blowing up all the areas here with a whip kept popping up in her mind, but her reason kept letting her restrain herself, because the result of doing so would probably be to her enemies. Create opportunities to attack yourself. When you took out the zitting shortbread from my hand, I was actually very nervous. I was really nervous. It must be because I am too weak. In your opinion, the few things on my body may be the slightly warm jade pendants and peace charms worn by rich people. Therefore, you should have treated me at that time. The nervousness and embarrassment turned into the embarrassment and confusion of a stranger taking his food. In fact, I was really scared to death at that time. After I left with my classmates, I finally got up the courage and went back to the hotel alone. It was not because I left anything in the hotel. I wanted to go there. Looking for you. My mind was very simple at the time, really very simple. I wanted to please you, I wanted to know you, even if I gave up my body, even if I gave everything I had, I wanted to get your protection. Call me stupid. At that time, I didn't even know what your strength was, but my sixth sense has always been accurate. I thought you were very powerful, I thought you were scary, and I thought you had the ability to protect me. However, I didn't expect to meet you on the way back to the hotel to find you. You were walking alone at that time. When I passed you by, my fear of you suppressed all my impulses. I didn't dare. Talking to you, I didn't even dare to look at you. When the girl said this, her expression suddenly changed, and a golden ginkgo leaf floated out from her clothes and stuck between her eyebrows. Her eyes were filled with a layer of brilliance at this moment, and she discovered it instantly. Sudbai was hiding 5 meters to his right. Go to hell. Whip, black mist. It burst out completely at this time. What she said before was actually not that the girl was relieving her stress, but that she was paralyzing Sudbai and making her own preparations. The ginkgo leaf had the effect of opening eyes and helped her directly discover Sudbai. Location. The whip directly restrained Sudbai, and the black mist suddenly enveloped him, and the terrifying corrosive power kept destroying Sudbai's soul. Ah 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 ah. Sudbai couldn't cry out now, and he couldn't scream out, but the vibrations of his soul could express what he meant. He was surprised, he was in pain, and he was caught off guard. A happy smile appeared on the girl's face. Now, I don't need your protection, because if I kill you, I can inherit one of your enhancements to me. I can protect myself now, I don't need to rely on you stinky men. Feeling the shrinkage and pain of Sudbai's soul, the smile on the girl's face became more and more obvious. She kept urging the whip and black mist to give Sudbai the final blow. She couldn't wait to kill Sudbai. This kind of impulse and expectation almost made her fall into a kind of hysteria. However, a black shadow tied to the cross appeared behind the girl when she was unaware that her attention was focused on Sudbai, who was about to be killed by her. The shadow stretched out a hand. Puff. The girl's body trembled. A black hand pierced through her chest. Immediately afterwards, this hand went all the way up and cut directly across the girl's body. The scene was extremely bloody and horrific. The girl's eyes widened, she still seemed unable to believe what was happening at this time. The whip fell, and the black mist lost control and returned to the bottle. Sudbai's very weak and damaged soul floated in front of the girl. The girl's face was already pale. Obviously, her time was running out. Ginger is really still spicy. She pursed her lips. Difficult way. If I had spoken to you at that time, would my fate have been different?